So I was on South Street today, and just as I got out of the car, I passed this guy who's wearing a T-shirt that was advertising a brand of beer. And his T-shirt said, "Bad decisions make great stories." And I thought, Jim, there's your slogan for the Story Slam. So tonight's theme is on the road, and there's an iconic novel. I know I'm in Upper Darby, and probably 80% of you won't know what this is. But on the Road is written by Jack Kerouac, and it wasn't even on my radar when I was in high school, but I got to college, and someone said, Chuck, you really got to read this novel, and so I read it, and it was pretty interesting. If you don't know anything about it, it was kind of a response to living in an era under the Eisenhower administration where America was very conservative, and Kerouac and his friends Neil Cassidy and the people that are kind of disguised in the book went out on the road, and their response to this American conservatism was, their reaction to this was just to go hog wild crazy, drunk, doing drugs, visiting whorehouses, cramming as much as they possibly could into as little time, and driving coast to coast, literally, all the time. That was their life. So this had a certain amount of appeal for me, but I didn't ever think I'd ever get an opportunity to live that kind of lifestyle. And I'm like you, I'm a Roman Catholic, and I was not really used to the idea of living vicariously through the pages of a novel as radical as On the Road. So when I was, about 5 or 6 years after reading the book, I went to a magazine company down in Knoxville, Tennessee. And one of the questions that they asked me, they made me look at the kind of magazines they published. And one of them was a magazine called America that came out once a year. And it was sponsored by Datsun. And it was basically it was a travel magazine for college kids. And so when I got into my interview, they asked me, what are some of your, wildest story ideas that you really like to do? And I said, well, for America, it would be really fun to follow Jack Kerouac's path across America and do like a road trip based on the road. And they kind of nodded and smiled, and I felt like they must have heard this dozens of times. And damn if I didn't get the job. And one of the first articles I had to do was write a very reassuring article about the economy for people that were graduating from college, because every 10 years or so the economy goes into the tank, and this was a time when the economy was in the tank. And so I don't know anything about big money and finance and how the economy works, but that was my job. So for 2 or 3 weeks, I plowed through, did interviews with all kinds of people about the economy, and gave them this story, and then they gave me this plum assignment to go on their dime for 3 weeks on the road. So I thought, wow, what the fuck? Okay, so I got in my car, and I headed down to New Orleans, where I had gone to college, and actually found the house where Neil Cassidy and Jack Kerouac had spent some time while they were hobnobbing and doing their tripping. And so then I decided, well, I've got carte blanche, I can go wherever I want to go. I was going to head out to San Francisco and see City Lights Bookstore. And in the meantime, I had quite a lot of, miles to go, so I headed for Texas. And Texas is a really fucking big state. It took me like 2 days, to get across Texas. And I'm about halfway through Texas, and I decide, what would Kerouac do? Kerouac would probably go down to Juarez and experience, some of the scenery of Juarez. If I really want to make this story real, I probably should go check out, a prostitution brothel in Juarez. And I, by the way, I was not seeing anyone at the time. I was single. I was footloose and fancy-free, but I also, knew there was some pretty sordid possibilities with going to Juarez. So I drove down to El Paso, I rented a hotel room, I had my passport, I went across the border, and within a minute and a half, an older gentleman came up to me. He saw me as a gringo tourist and said, I'd let me show you Juarez. And I thought to myself, okay, I don't know, I just am here for dinner, sir. I have a good restaurant I can take you to. So his name was Chico Rodriguez, and I foolishly got into his car, and Chico, Mr. Rodriguez, started driving through Juarez. Now, I was okay. He seemed like a nice guy. He was 70 years old or so. And I thought if I really got in trouble, I could probably hold my own against this old man. But about halfway through the city of Juarez, when I'm driving down some very narrow streets and it was very dark, the thought occurred to me that this wasn't the most safe thing I could have done. Not such a really great decision. So he hooked a right in the middle of the barrio and showed up at this incredible Mexican restaurant. And we went into the restaurant. We had a meal. I paid for his meal. We had a couple drinks. The bill was like $7. I thought I'm pretty much ahead of where I should be. And then he said, well, now let's go take you to where you really want to go. And I said, well, wait a minute, where do I really want to go? I said, don't worry, I know where you want to go. I'm going to take you to where you want to go. So he drove a few more blocks, and there I was, just like Jack Kerouac. I didn't have my sidekick, Neil Cassidy. I had Chico Rodriguez with me, and he was not about to indulge in what I was about to indulge, but he told me, this is where you want to go. So I went into the brothel with my notepad, and I said, I'm doing a story. I'd really like to talk to one of your ladies. I think this could be something for my story. And they took me upstairs, and I got to meet Maria. Now, Maria was, as Bob Dylan would know in Queen Jane approximately, Maria knew English well, and she was perfectly willing to give me her life story. And she had a little medallion of the Virgin Mary around her neck, which I thought was a pretty ironic little thing to notice. And we were talking for about 10 minutes, and then this other woman comes into the room, and they start talking in Spanish. And I guess she was a nurse or something. I didn't quite know what they were discussing. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, maybe what size I was, or were they going to look at my equipment, or were they going to give me a condom or something? And I tried to explain to Maria, no, I'm really not interested in that. I just want to get some verisimilitude for my story. I just want to have a conversation with you. And so the woman left, and I had a 15-minute conversation with Maria, and I wrote all of this for my story. And then Mr. Rodriguez graciously took me back to the border, and everything was fine. But it was a pretty memorable trip, and I do owe a lot to Jack Kerouac for writing On the Road.